Welcome everyone to our global webinar. Today we are going to be speaking about one of the most important topics when we are speaking about fraud, which is corruption. Corruption is considered today #1 issue. When we look at all the survey, all the study, all the research is saying the main reason why our economy is back, the main reason why actually crisis is happening, the main reason why governments are collapsing is because of corruption. It is because of this culture of bribery, the culture where it's allowing everyone to say, I am first before the organization, before the society, before the government. And we need to understand as fraud fighters, how can we actually go and stop corruptions inside the organization? What are the different schemes that can happen related to corruption? And how can we make sure that we have the proper internal controls to fight bribery and corruption? And with that, today we have with us a very special guest speaker, Mr. Mike Masoud, and he is actually the Senior Director of the Middle East and Africa for the American Anti-Corruption Institute, which is the American Anti-Corruption Institute. If you are not aware, it's one of the leading organizations all over the world speaking about how can governments and organizations fight fraud and corruption. With that, I'm going to give the mic to Mr. Mike.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Murtada, for hosting me at this exceptional session. And I would like to congratulate you with what you are doing in Dubai regarding the fight against corruption and all the programs you carry on all over the way. I know that I have just 50 minutes at most to cover what I'm supposed to do tonight. I'm based in Beirut these days because of Corona, and that's why I'm saying tonight. Well, just to give you a fair overview about the ASCI and myself, I just have here, the links that you can go afterwards to find out about more information about the ASCI and myself. But, just a bit of things about the ASCI. We are focusing on equipping those decision makers, those who are responsible for making decisions in entities of all kinds of entities, rather than focusing on the technical people, technical guys and entities. This is the main differentiation between what we do and others, actually, like the ACFE, for example. About myself, I'm not going to talk about myself that much, except as or besides what Mr. Murtada said. I'm leading the American Anti-Corruption Institute's operations in the Middle East and Africa. And that's why, you can ask me many things about this region, it's a huge and wide region. But I'm basically involved and engaged in all sorts of things about anti-corruption issues and the other activities with the ASCI. I'm not going to market myself or the entity I'm representing, but these things will come in the introduction just in a second. The points I'm going to discuss today will focus basically on the main. I'm not going to cover all the fraud and corruption schemes because there are many, but I'm going to focus on the most critical stuff. In addition to this, I'm going to focus on corruption and an overview about the UNCAC, the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. And by the end, I'm going to sum up what I'm going to say, and then I'll discuss, I'll give a few words about the most recent trends and schemes that we have been witnessing, over the past, let's say, 9 months or 1 year. Okay, with that, let me proceed with the introduction. What is corruption? Okay, now we at the ACI defines corruption as the abuse of power or perceived power or entrusted authority for direct or indirect private monetary or non-monetary gain. We believe that this is the definition that suits in many cases, in many instances, in many parts of the world. Of course, you and I are aware about that there are many definitions of corruption. For example, that of the Transparency International and others. By the way, for example, the United United Nations does not define corruption. Okay, in the OECD, they do not define corruption. Okay, they present cases or they present felonies, and they focus on the ramifications or the consequences and the legal issues that are related to those crimes. We do not classify corruption. For example, we do not say that we have administrative or financial corruption. We do not believe in that. In fact, we do not believe that such a classification exists, by the way, unless it has a purpose. But technically, corruption is corruption, whatever the case is, wherever the ill acts happen. Now, when we talk about power, we deal with all types and kinds of power, okay? Irrespective of the source of this power, because, you know, by the end of the day, if you do not have power, you do not have corruption. You have to have a power to abuse it so that you have corruption. But this kind of power, of course, it must come from a source. Whatever the source is, okay, but there must be a source of that power or perceived power. Now, I'm going to move a little bit fast, and I will leave many details until you raise it in a question when we reach that part of the webinar. Okay. Now, as Mr. Murtada said, it is the enemy number one of all nations, corruption. Look at any country where there is a problem, you'll find that corruption is available here or there. All right? Now, make no mistake that corruption leads countries to fail. It underlies many countries' failures in many parts of the world. And if you will just check, you can Google corruption on right now, and you'll find every day many news about politicians, about countries, about companies. We'll come to that if you'd like to. So we believe that if you would like to protect your country, protect your entity, prevent corruption, you have to know what corruption is. Unless you know what corruption is, take it from me, you will never ever be effective in fighting corruption. So you have to know your enemy. You have to raise the awareness about what corruption is, what are the characteristics of corruption, how corruption happens, how money laundering happens. Because when we talk about corruption, we are taking the standpoint of the widest definition, or widest, let me put it this way, the widest claim of corruption, which is fighting corruption, financing terrorism, and money laundering. So money laundering is implicitly included in when we talk about corruption. Now, to fight corruption intelligently, it's not enough to know what corruption is to fight it intelligently. To fight it intelligently, it means it should be a comprehensive and integrated approach. We'll come to this. I'm including this in the introduction because, you know, it will be irrelevant to talk about it after if we go the other way around. We go technical, then we'll talk about this later. No, I prefer to move from this point forward so that we can make it effective. So when I say fighting corruption, what is our definition to fighting corruption? Fighting corruption is a process effected by those charged with governance, employees, citizens, and other stakeholders to provide a reasonable assurance that those entrusted with power did not abuse it for a private gain. This is what we define, or this is the way we define fighting corruption. Okay, it is holistic, multidisciplinary, encompasses all economic sectors. It should be results-oriented and continuous. In other words, iterative. Okay, now this is fighting corruption in brief. We can spend one whole day, okay, 8 hours just discussing this concept. And I don't think that you have seen this concept somewhere else. This is the way we look at it. This is the way we deal with it. This is the way we base our discussions with leaders all over the world when we talk about discussions, when we talk about strategic planning for fighting corruption. Okay, now. At the ACI, we have 10 principles of fighting corruption. We cannot fight the corruption without any framework. Okay, so it's a frame of reference. You can use this PowerPoint. You can click on the frame of reference so that you have more details about what are the fighting corruption principles of fighting corruption. We believe that these principles are foundation or very foundational to institutionalize fighting corruption, money laundering, and financing terrorism. Without these principles, in other words, if I want to judge if this country or that entity or that corporation, okay, or that agency, whether they fight corruption effectively or not, we use these 10 principles as a frame of reference wherever they apply, okay? Now, our methodology is principle-based approach, not rule-based, okay? And by the way, we can take these 10 principles and go back to the United Nations, the UNCAC, the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, and we'll find them embedded here and there. We'll talk about the UNCAC, you know, at a part of this presentation. After maybe half an hour to address it. All right. Now, fraud and corruption schemes. Fraud and corruption schemes. Now, when I'm going to, as per the Bible of Mr. Murtada emailed me and said, I want you to talk about these things. So I said, okay, no problem. So that's why, you know, I'm abide with what he said, what he asked me to discuss, which I like. Now, billing schemes, by the way, even if you'll go to the report of the nations of the ACFE, which I love big time, of 2020 or the earlier years, billing schemes are the mostly, they are the famous schemes for any corruption. Okay, now, billing schemes is a part of the fraudulent disbursements, which is part of asset misappropriation, just to make things clear. So I made this slide for you to understand exactly where we stand. Asset misappropriation, okay, has many branches or many areas or many issues to discuss. Now, fraudulent disbursements is part of the asset misappropriation. Now, billing schemes, payroll schemes, expense reimbursement schemes form what we call fraudulent disbursements. Okay? Now, fraudulent disbursements basically is the process whereby the employer pays or commits to pay false claims. As simple as that. Make no mistake, you know, I do not know the background of most of you, so I'm trying to simplify as much as I can. Anyway, so fraudulent disbursements are basically happens when the employer or the entity, victim company, the victim entity, pays or commits itself to pay false claims. Now, these false claims come through billing schemes, payroll schemes, and expense reimbursement schemes, which is what we call fraudulent disbursements. Now, what do we mean by, or what consists, or what are the types of the billing schemes I'm going to discuss tonight? One, shell vendor schemes. Two, not accomplice vendor schemes. And the final one is personal purchases with the company funds. Okay, with that, I will come to the billing schemes. Now, if you look here, we have the employer or the victim company, and we have the vendor, and the corrupt employee. Now, in the process of the billing schemes, or all kinds of billing schemes, I want you to focus on, as I said, the employer or the victim company, the corrupt employee, and the vendor. Now, under billing schemes, I'm going to use this later. Under billing schemes, okay, the corrupt employee do all he can, or does all he can to persuade the employer to pay for something he might not have received, or partially received, or overpriced, or we are going to discuss more. You will see that in most of the cases, the vendor does not conspire with the corrupt employee. Anyway, let's put it this way. Under billing schemes, the slide we can just see on the screen, the corrupt employee does not conspire with the vendor. All right, so no collusion. Now, so we have, as you can see on the right of the screen, or the left of the screen, we have shell vendor schemes and personal purchases with company funds. And we have on the right here, we have not accomplished vendor schemes. Now let me talk about the shell vendor schemes. But before that, when a company buys anything, under normal circumstances, if there is a fair internal control system, there must be a request to buy something. And there must be someone who approves to buy this thing, let's say an asset. There must be a request to buy an asset, someone to approve buying this asset. Then there must be someone who receives the asset, another one who's going to approve the payment for the invoice, and then there must be a payment function, accounts payable in other words. Okay, so let me just summarize a little bit. There must be an authorization for the purchase, okay, and there must be an independent function for the receipt of the goods or the services. And 3, there must be another function which is approval for payment. Of course, we are going to obey what's approved, but these are the 3 main things. So authorization, receipt of goods or services, and approval of the payment. Make no mistake that these are the most important 3 functions that we have to take into consideration even when we assess an internal control structure or design an internal control structure, as far as the purchases is concerned, and specifically under this scheme. Now, under the shell vendor scheme, the corrupt employee will provide the invoice of a shell company he established, by the way, just a paper company for the employee, the corrupt employee. This company could be in his wife's name or any trustworthy party for him. Okay, sometimes the address of this company could be his house or his trusted party house or office, whatever it is. He provided the employer with a fake invoice. This invoice will be from this victim company, this shell company. Now, the employer or someone in the company must approve it for payment. Now, this is the tricky part. This is the most difficult point, to get someone to approve this invoice, which is fake invoice. This invoice, by the way, could be fake, could be altered, could be overvalued, priced invoice. It could be anything. But in this case, it is the fake company. It's a fake invoice from a shell company. But it can be mixed with other forms of schemes. And then assume that the corrupt employee did not get the employer to sign this invoice. The corrupt employee might forge the signature of the employer, or he might bribe the guy who's going to approve it for payment. Everything happens under these circumstances. Okay. Now, once it is approved, he can take it to the payment department, accounts payable department, or and then they can send them the companies can pay him by check to his company. Now, personal purchases with company funds, as simple as, let me simplify this one. If you have a corrupt CEO, by the way, in a company, he can buy a computer to his son and make the company pay base for that computer. As simple as that. As simple as that. Okay. Now, not accomplished vendor schemes. As I said, there is no collusion here. It's very simple. Let me give you 2 cases. The corrupt employee, sometimes he intercepts a check paid to the vendor, which is a true payment. He plays with the check. He altered the check. For example, he increases the funds of the check. He wants to reach a point where there will be a refund from the vendor. This is the point. So a corrupt employee intercepts a payment to the vendor. He alter the check that is paid to the vendor. Then they call the vendor, he calls the vendor, and they ask for a refund. Then he will intercept the refund, he will take the refund, and he will forger it. He will he will endorse the check. He will once the check is in his hands, you are done as a company. Sometimes the company, the corrupt employee, requests more goods from the vendor so that they can return part of it, and then he can intercept the payment. I mean, the refund itself, and then of course he will take the refund. How? It's more detailed how he does it, but he might endorse it. He might take it. He will take it. Now, it seems that they discussed the shell vendor scheme earlier, and I said it's a fake invoice, so no goods or services. The corrupt employee get the approval of the employer on the fake invoice, then the corrupt employee receives the money. That's what I said just earlier. Okay. Now, what about bribery, economic extortion, illegal gratuity, and conflict of interest? This is, I'm going to discuss it under the heading corruption. By the way, many people, many times they will say, okay, you are talking about fraud and corruption. What's the difference between fraud and corruption? Fraud and corruption, here in the context of tonight's discussion, we are talking about the corruption as it is classified by in this context, the ACFE, okay? But basically, corruption is, and of course, corruption, I would like to refer you to the definition we discussed earlier. But here, the classification is as it is listed usually by the ACFE, and we adopt, by the way, the ACFE classification of these things. Now, but make no mistake that corruption is a legal concept. In other words, what corruption means let's say in Lebanon differs from what corruption means in Dubai or in Los Angeles or in Malaysia or Kuala Lumpur or anywhere else. Why? Because what defines what corruption is the local rules and regulations that might differ from one country to another country. In other words, you might have some corrupt acts in a country A that are not considered corrupt acts in another country. Having said that, let me talk about something that I like to talk about everywhere, which is bribery. Bribery is illegal and unethical exchange transaction. Well, I made it bold here just to discuss it. Exchange transaction. In other words, there must be a seller and buyer. For what? Let's look at what is at stake here. We have a buyer for a power, and we have a seller for a power. Okay? Now, the one who's going to sell his power, he needs money for that. This money is called bribe. Now, the one who needs the power is a buyer. He pays the bribe. Okay? As you can see, the mere offering of the bribe is a crime, and the acceptance of the bribe is something different. It is another crime. In many countries, by the way. At least when I talk about all these things, I'm talking about what they represent in the US. So it's an exchange transaction. And when I say an exchange transaction, it means there is a market. Wow. Is there a market for that? Of course. In every country, there is a market for corruption. And that's why you have buyers and sellers. Buyers for power and sellers for power. What kind of power? Well, it depends about whom we discuss, about whom we talk about. Okay? Now, the bribery consists of two schemes, or usually are portrayed in two schemes: kickback schemes and bid rigging schemes. All right, let's move forward. Now, the kickback schemes are almost the same. Okay, it's almost the same, if I'm not mistaken, as the billing schemes. And that's why, that's why I discussed billing schemes. Because when we talk about the kickback schemes, we have a vendor, corrupt vendor and corrupt employee, and we have an employer. But when it comes to kickbacks, kickback schemes, we are talking about the same schemes, almost the same billing schemes, but with one exception. There is collusion between the corrupt vendor and the corrupt employee. However, under the billing scheme that we discussed earlier, there is no collusion between the corrupt vendor and corrupt employee. And generally speaking, I'm going to discuss very briefly the overbilling scheme, fictitious invoices, and directing business, okay? Now, when I talk about overbilling, it's very simple. But let me give you one example, you know. When I heard Murtada, you know, announcing the October webinars, and he said something I like big time, which is, he said, I'm going to bring real cases, not theory. Well, come on, we're not talking about theory, we're talking about concepts that applies to many cases. Now, overbilling here, the corrupt employee, assume that I'm a corrupt employee, okay? And I would like to buy, let's say, a car to the company. Well, the market value of the car is just $10,000 US. Well, the corrupt vendor, he would like to me, as a corrupt employee, want to buy his car. You know, he's an agent for a certain brand, for example. He wants me to buy from him a car of brand, whatever it is. And then the corrupt vendor would like to overprice that car. For example, he would like to charge the company $15,000. And the corrupt employee will take share of that. Okay? So let's say they will split it 50-50, 50%, 50%. Okay? So overbilling, and this applies to all kinds of purchases. So under overbilling, the corrupt employee helps the corrupt vendor to get the approval of the employer on overpriced purchases from the corrupt employee, the corrupt vendor. That's it. Now the worst is, if the corrupt vendor conspire with the corrupt employee to make the employer approve a payment to the corrupt vendor for completely fake invoice where the employer did not receive anything of service or anything of goods. There is another scheme, which is when the corrupt vendor pays a bribe to the corrupt employee just to direct the business to the corrupt vendor. For example, the car example I gave is okay. If I'd like to buy a BMW or Mercedes, okay, if I am a corrupt employee, you know, I can go to the Mercedes and say, okay, Mercedes agent and say, okay, I can buy from you 3 cars of Mercedes to my management. Though I can change my mind and convince them to go for BMW, etc. So to direct the business to the vendor, you know, the corrupt employee, okay, will get a bribe or will get paid by the corrupt vendor. So these are 3 schemes under the kickbacks. Now let's go to the very serious stuff, which is bid rigging schemes. Bid rigging schemes is a very serious, very dangerous topic that I believe everyone, whether in private or public sector, or even the civil society entities, should have sufficient awareness about it. What is bidding? It is a special set of purchases that has specific terms and conditions. And so the one who's responsible for bidding is a bidding committee, okay, for certain kind of purchases. The bid itself, it has terms and conditions, okay, the purchases or the specific purchase has its terms and conditions. The philosophy of the bid is to make it equal for all vendors, and the essence of the bidding process is what? Confidentiality. So what is bid rigging? Bid rigging is a payment of a bribe at any stage of the bidding process by a corrupt vendor, okay, to a corrupt employee. As simple as that. A payment of a bribe by a corrupt vendor or bidder to a corrupt employee, okay, at a certain stage of the bidding process. So who bribes whom and when? Well, let's find out. The bidding process, as we can see on the screen, consists of 3 phases: pre-solicitation, solicitation, and submission. So this is the bidding process. Okay. Now, the bid rigging schemes. Under the pre-solicitation, we have the need recognition scheme, and we have the specification schemes. Under the solicitation phase, we have bid pooling, fictitious supplier, and other methods. And under the submission, we'll talk right now when we finish these schemes very quickly. Now, need recognition scheme. It is an, let me just, I'm just looking at the time I spent discussing what I said right now. So let me focus very quickly here. Need recognition scheme. It is the situation where the employee will convince the employer to buy something that the company doesn't need it. Okay? Again, the need recognition scheme is the situation whereby the corrupt employee will convince the employer, okay, or the victim company to buy something in reality the company doesn't need it. For example, the company, of course, what will be the benefit of the employee, corrupt employee? He will be taking a bribe. Now, for example, if a corrupt employee persuades the minister of ministry of country A to buy computers for that ministry, whereby in reality the ministry doesn't need these computers. Of course, there is collusion between the corrupt employee and specific supplier, you know, of the computers. Now this will make it easy for me to discuss specification scheme. Specification schemes, as we said, it is a special case, or it's a special case of purchase. That's why we have specifications for the service or the product we are going to buy. Now, the corrupt employee will design the specifications of the computers so that they will fit only to the corrupt vendor with whom the corrupt employee conspire. So they will set specifications just to suit him. Why? Because they would like to design the tender or the bid so that it applies only to that company. So they will kill the competition. Now we'll go to the solicitation, bid pooling. A bid pooling, it happens, okay, when two or more of the bidders will agree to work together, so that each time, you know, one of the vendors will get something of the whole stuff. Okay, this is illegal, by the way. This is illegal in many countries. We call it bid pooling. Fictitious suppliers. Fictitious suppliers. If a company would like to have, if the tender says, okay, would like to have from, let's say, not a company, let me put it this way. In certain cases, the corruption or the corruption itself goes with, whereby the vendors, with the aid of corrupt employees in the victim company, will make sure that they have 4, 5, 6 vendors, okay? They are fake vendors, fake entities, by the way, fake vendors, and their prices are very high. And the real vendor, you know, the corrupt vendor, he knows the prices, of course, because they are aware about the scheme. So they provide, they send or they submit lower invoice, lower prices, so that they can win the bid. Fictitious suppliers, okay? Let me give you one real example. Assume that we have the four vendors to one bid. 2 are fictitious, and the 2 real vendors, you know, they agree that they are going to share the bid together. So they colluded together. Okay, this is called, we have fake suppliers or fake vendors, and we have bid pooling at the same time. It happens, yes, it happens. Other methods, many other methods in this case. We'll discuss it if we would like to when it comes to the questions and answer session. For example, bid splitting when it comes to other methods. For example, if you have corrupt employee who can, assume that the policy of the company purchase that is more than $100,000, okay, there'll be a bidding process. Assume that a purchase of $150,000 value, where we can split it into 75-75, and I can direct these purchases as a corrupt employee to the vendor that I'm conspiring with, who is paying me kickbacks or bribes. Under the submission phase, now here there are many other schemes actually, where, for example, the corrupt employee will show the prices of the vendor of the bids to the corrupt vendor, so that he can change the price of his bid. So in many cases, you hear that some people, you know, they come last and they win the bid. The last bid to submit, and he's always a winner of that bid. Okay. Submission, for example, assume that there is a very important. There's competition, and the corrupt employee is controlling who they can reject even the documents at the last point. So the bid log, you know, when they come and submit the documents, they play with the bid log itself. Many other schemes under the submission schemes are also available. Okay. Economic extortion. I would like just to present it as they are. Economic extortion, it's very simple. An official or a business, okay, or resume requires a citizen to or vendor to pay him a bribe to decide in his favor. Economic extortion. For example, assume that I would like to renew my passport in one of the developing countries. It takes 15 days to renew your passport. Presume that, which is not necessarily true. Well, sometimes if you will pay a bribe for an official, you can finish it within 5 days or 2 days. Or economic extortion. Well, let me give you another example. You'll find it in many countries, If the police officer will stop you and say, okay, pay me $10 or I will give you a fine for $50. What do you think? I'll pay him 10. I will not pay, but this is a case, actually. This happens. Gratuity is a gift. It's an illegal gift. An illegal gift is a bribe. This I like to write it this way. Now, what is illegal gratuity? It's a gift. I mean, illegal gratuity is a gift by itself. But what if someone offers you a gift and you are a company's staff or employee, or you are, for example, an employee of a bank, or you are a minister, or you are whoever you are, by the way. Shall you accept the gift? What do you think? Of course, we'll come to the question and answer session. But shall you accept that gift? If I were you, I will accept it, subject to one simple thing I want you to do. Disclose it immediately to your superior. Disclose it immediately to your superior. Otherwise, if you not disclose it, it will be most likely an advance payment of a bribe. So bribe could be paid in many ways, and this could be an advance payment of a bribe. I can give you many examples in the banking industry about this case. Okay. What are the red flags of the bribery schemes? Any sign of collusion between bidders, by the way. Have to make sure about it. Or any indication of interference in accepting late bid. If you are a company official, okay, or you are a regulatory agency, you have to be careful about these things. Any sign of collusion between bidders, any indication of interference in accepting late bid. Or if there is an evidence that there are bidders who reveal their prices to each other. What does this mean? Well, be careful. Bid pooling, I said bid pooling is illegal. Specifications that are designed to fit with the contractor's products. It's an indication that there is corruption or bribery schemes or bid rigging in this area. and many other red flags are available, by the way. Okay. Let's talk about conflicts of interest. I still have, I think, 5 to 10 minutes, and I have to cover many things. Conflict of interest. It occurs when an employee influences a business decision to the detriment of his employer, where he has an undisclosed, underlying undisclosed interest in it, undisclosed. The employee's interest can be financial or non-financial. It can also be economic and non-economic or uneconomic. Now, I know that many of you know the difference between duty of care and duty of loyalty. Now, what shall one do when he has a fiduciary duty and potential conflicts of interest? He shall make full disclosure and refrain from deciding on transaction he has potential conflicts of interest. So, full disclosure, and refrain from deciding on transactions he has potential conflicts of interest. Now, schemes, conflicts of interest schemes, as the diagram here shows, we have sales schemes and purchase schemes. Now, look at the green stuff. It says employees' hidden interest in a company. And the other one, the other box on the left, the gray one, it says victim company. Under sales schemes, the corrupt employee who has conflict of interest, undisclosed conflict of interest, he will make his victim company buy from where he has a hidden interest at what? Higher prices or lower prices. Again, the victim company will buy from the employee's hidden interest, okay, where the corrupt employee has a conflict of interest. He will buy at higher than prices, higher than the sales price of the hidden company of the seller. So I will pay for more for the purchases, and I will sell as a victim company. I will pay more for the purchases, and I will sell lower than what I sell to other people. Okay. Again, the victim company will sell the employees hidden interest. The company where the employees has a hidden interest, I will sell it as at lower prices. Okay, and I will buy at higher than I buy from others. And that's why, you know, where with these two schemes, the victim company will suffer big time. I will sell at lower prices and I will buy for higher prices. Prevention of conflicts of interest. The entity, the victim company, the entity shall have a policy where it defines precisely what constitutes a conflict of interest. In many cases, by the way, I face, they say, well, I do not know. Wow. Sometimes you'll find a CEO says, well, really? I did not know that this is a conflict of interest. Request employees to complete an annual disclosure stating their potential conflict of interest if they had or if they suspected, by the way. Request employees to immediately report any actual or potential conflict of interest to a higher level of supervisors or to the designated party in the company. And last but not the least, provide employees with proper learning programs and conduct brainstorming sessions, etc. I mean, you have to invest in the learning process of the employees about the conflict of interest. Okay, if they do not know what conflicts of interest is, they will not be able to report, and they will not be able to comply with the policy as in the first place. All right, how can you detect conflict of interest? Performing proper scrutiny and due diligence of new vendors' ownership before listing them as approved vendors to the company. Okay, do not buy from unknown parties as an entity. You have to have an independent verification of the identity and the owners of the vendors. Establishing a corruption prevention policy that usually enables employees, vendors, and other stakeholders to provide the company with tips and complaints. And by the way, the major way or the primary way to uncover corruption and fraud, by the way, is what? Tips. Tips from whom? Tips from employees and tips from customers, by the way, the customers and the employees. I would like to talk about the UNCAC, the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. We call it UNCAC. It is a set of standards, measures, and rules, okay, to strengthen the legal and regulatory regimes to fight corruption of the countries, of course. It's the first of their kind to prevent and detect corruption and to return the proceeds, by the way. This is very important. Proceeds in this context means any stolen assets, using corruption from one country and taking these assets to another country. This agreement established the methodology and the ways and means to return these stolen assets to the original country or the stolen country. Because of this agreement, they celebrate the 9th of December of each year, and they call it the International Anti-Corruption Day. It was put into force by December 14, 2005. And as of February 2020, we have 187 members. We have 8 chapters in this convention, in this agreement or this contract. I call it convention, whatever it is, but it is an agreement between, by the United Nations that provided and provides very important good stuff, by the way. These are the chapters of the agreement. We have almost 71 articles and 8 chapters. I would love to highlight quickly the few articles, 2-3 articles from the whole agreement. Meaning people should read it, by the way. If I were you, I will go and just skim the agreement. If I were you, I will focus on where you are interested to focus. For example, I would love to focus all the time on number 2, preventive measures, because the ASCI focuses on prevention more than anything else. Article 5. I would like to read with you Article 5, Clause 1, only Clause 1. It says each state party shall, in accordance with the fundamental principles of its legal system, develop and implement or maintain effective coordinated anti-corruption policies that promote 1, the participation of the society, and 2, reflect the principles of the rule of law, proper management of public affairs and public property, and integrity, transparency, and accountability. And the question I would like to raise it here. If the United Nations, if the countries who ratified the agreement oblige only this one clause, I think the whole world will be better. But unfortunately, many countries do not apply many clauses of the UN Convention Against Corruption, though they have signed on them. And if you'd like to give you examples, I can give you many examples. But look at this clause. Look at this other clause, okay? I will leave it for you to read it, okay? It's very important. Ask yourself, if my country applies this strictly, will we be better? If the company I work with, or the ministry I work for, or the ministry of ABC in my country apply this clearly or strictly, shall we be in a better situation? I think yes. This is a clause number 60, by the way, 1A and B. Okay, look how they focus on establishing anti-corruption policies, etc. Unfortunately, how many companies in this country or that country, they have comprehensive anti-corruption policy? I do not know, but I know, but I will share with you, if you'd like me, my impressions. The last thing, but not the least, which is recent trends and schemes. When I started to think about what I'm going to say about this slide, I wanted to say the following so that, I can give you the best of what I know about where we are heading and what about the trends. When I talk about schemes, I'm talking about many schemes, including financial statements fraud, that I'm going to talk about it just in a few seconds. But the first thing I would like to talk about is, now right now in the United States, there is a bill that is in the Congress. I think it is moved to the Senate, but because of what's going on right now because of Corona and the election year, they are waiting for that. It's called Combating Global Corruption Act of 2019. It's a very important act. Very, very important act. It's a game changer in the fight against corruption globally. Okay. If someone asks me a question about it, I can address it in that when you ask about it. There is another thing. Now we started to hear about Magnitsky Act, this is a 2012 act of the US. It's a law, by the way. It is a law. The first one is the S1301. It is a bill, not a law yet. But Magnitsky Act is a law. And I want to highlight that the United States started to apply it in many countries and use it with the corruption cases. And basically, if you'd like to go and see what it means, just go for Title 4, Section 402. You will be amazed about what's going on. Now, the other thing that I would like to talk about is the external auditors' audit's role, or what is the role of the internal audit in preventing and detecting corruption. As per the report of the nation, since they started to issue it, all of us know that the external audit doesn't detect that much of corruption or fraud, because, by the way, I passed the CPA exam, so I know it. We do not design audits to detect immaterial fraud and corruption. Make no mistake about it. If you'd like me to talk about it, I can talk about it. But two recent big stuff happened recently, which is the NMC Health PLC, who defrauded whom. It's a big stuff. We're talking about 6.2 something billion US dollars scandal, where the auditor failed to detect these long-time fraud and corruption. And we have the other corruption, fraud, financial statements fraud, which is the most expensive fraud, by the way. The Wirecard corruption of Germany, which is, I call it made in Germany. It's 2.2 billion US dollars failure to recognize in the financial statements. As always, if you'd like to have an effective anti-corruption policy or a comprehensive corruption policy, part of it should be tips. More than 50% of the cases of corruption and fraud are discovered through tips. Why? Because corruption is something that happened in collusion with others, so they'd like to cover it. So tips is the most important thing, and usually comes from employees and customers. But guess what? If you'd like to maximize the likelihood to uncover fraud and corruption, you have to have well-trained employees and customers who can access you if there is corruption or they expect something. With that, I'm ready for question and answer from you, and I would like to thank you. I would like to thank you for your patience to listen to me for all this stuff, and I'm available for questions if you have. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for your amazing presentation. We are getting amazing feedback about the presentation and the knowledge sharing that you gave us. One very interesting question is about what can you see currently today in the age of Corona? What kind of corruption is happening, especially now there are vaccines that they are going to be introducing, and there are different kind of testing and results. And the governments in some countries, they are not reporting the right numbers. What kind of corruption and the issues you can see recently?
In fact, this is a daily reported news. First of all, you will have those who will say, okay, by the way, all kinds, you can see all kinds. Number one, you will see that companies who are in the pharmaceutical industry who will hint that they are researching in this area, so that they would like to affect their share price. Now, sometimes, of course, you and I know that if anyone would like to make any release, and this one or this entity is listed in the stock exchange, they are under scrutiny of the IRS, at least in the US, or the stock exchange regulator. In addition to this, by the way, make no mistake that you will find so many people who are defrauding people to sell them COVID-19 related vaccines, okay? In addition to this, but make no mistake, the most important part here is the corruption in the healthcare industry. Because let me give you something. In many countries, the public sector, you know, started to accept, to absorb the fees to inspect coronavirus of the public, of the people who are not insured. So you'll have insurance claims, okay? You'll have corruption in the insurance claims. You have corruption in claiming that we have found cures, etc. In addition to this, be careful that we are related to the pharmaceutical industry itself. Now, this is the primary things that we read about every day. Primary things.
Thank you very much. Another question they were speaking about, you mentioned Germany. So the question is, Germany before 1999 consider bribery as a business expense. They can actually, organization recognize it and is allowed if they are paying it outside Germany. So what can you see happening globally related to making bribes, not to government, to private business? Because still until so many countries, we don't have regulations against that.
Correct. Let me go back, before Germany, let me go back to the FCPA 1977, Foreign Corrupt Practice Act of 1977 in the US. It says that US entities are not allowed to pay a bribe overseas to public officials. It kept silent about private officials. Then we came to the UK 2010 Bribery Act in the US, in the UK. This criminalized paying a bribe to anyone, public or private. When it comes to Germany, I am not aware about their law, by the way. I am not aware about their law, but I think if you'd like to look at Germany, you have to look at Germany through the EU, the European Union. Okay, and I do not think that the EU, Germany can handle accepting their entities to pay bribes for public officials overseas or private officials. However, let me go back. I do not want to mention the name of the countries in the Arab countries where many major German companies were caught-handed paying bribes to public officials.
All right, another interesting question. The person, he said he is working currently in American company, but they are operating in Asia. And based on the Foreign Corrupt Practice Act, you know, facilitation payment is actually allowed. So he's trying to figure out how can he differentiate between facilitation payment and what is the definition of facilitation payment compared to bribes. When, you know, his employees, they are saying we paid these expenses related to facilitation payment, it's not actually bribe.
I will answer the question. This is where the tricky stuff comes. I am legally liable to what I'm going to say. Now, I will say the following. 1, ask your CPA firm. 2, ask your lawyer. 3, ask your compliance officer. And by the end of the day, if you have anything that you're suspicious about it, report it to your appropriate level or your company's policy, period.
All right, perfect. Another interesting question. Do you know, this organization, they said we have so many agents and third party doing business on our behalf in so many countries. And we are not sure if these you know, agents or third party, they are bribing customers for them to buy the goods and services. What can we do to ensure we are not going to get into corruption or bribery case because of this third party we are dealing with?
Are you asking the question on behalf of the US company?
Yes.
Okay. Now, as a US company, I am now, of course, if you are listed in the stock market, in the stock exchange in the US is something, and if you are a small business is something else, a little bit. Now, irrespective of that, if you have an agent, you have to make sure that you know with whom you are dealing with. Number 1. Number 2, if you believe that, now what due diligence means in this regard? I, as a US company, I must make my own due diligence about the vendors I'm dealing with and make sure that they do not pay bribes. I can ask them to implement an anti-corruption policy. I can ask them to have this policy, by the way, reported on by a third party. In addition to this, I can ask them to comply with specific rules and regulations. You have to do your own job, sir. But you cannot say, well, because they do not know they violated the law. No, as long as you are dealing with a company and you are a US company, you should make sure that they do not violate all the laws and rules and regulations that you are applicable to.
Thank you very much. Our final question, and this question is interesting. He say, what if I am not a US company? Is it okay for me to pay bribes around, or is there any regulations against me if I'm not actually following European or American rules, if I'm based in Asia or Middle East?
Well, guess what? To answer this specific question, I will put it the other way around. If I am doing business in a country A, so that, avoiding the names, the question is it legal for me to pay a bribe? Can you pay a bribe to a judge? Of course, no. Can you pay a bribe to a business partner? You can. Even in the US, you can pay a bribe, but you will be liable to the law. Which law? The law that applies to you. But let's go back a little bit backward and look at it in this way. Do you think that sustaining a business can be through bribe payments? The answer is no. In all studies that we are aware of, any business that would like to sustain itself and continue in doing business, with ethics, with responsibility, social responsibility, he should not pay bribes. You might say, well, this is called facilitating payment. We cannot do business in this way or another unless you pay bribe. It's up to you. For example, we do not pay bribes wherever we go. I am based in the Middle East and Africa. I do not pay a bribe to get the business, whatever the case is. Do we lose business because we do not pay bribes? Yes, we do. The easiest thing is to, don't you think that your life will be easier when you pay people's money? Of course they will be very happy, but it's up to you. By the way, just to close this very important point, paying a bribe or committing corruption is a choice. It's your call. It's not anybody else's decision. But the question is, can you live up to it? If you are in doubt, just take this example. Can you sustain? Can you stand in public proudly if the newspaper knows about you? That's it.
All right, thank you very much for your valuable input. And always we say when we are speaking about corruption, that the person who's paying the bribe got higher responsibility 10 times from the person who is receiving the bribe, because he is allowing the corruption culture to be created inside the organization. If we stand and we say, no, we are not going to make the payment, these guys who are corrupted, they will not be able to strive and work in our organizations. If we report them to the authority, if we take the right action, but sometimes, we are thinking about short term, sometimes we are under pressure, and we think the only way for us to move ahead is to make this payment. And this, unfortunately, sometimes what will happen. And what they say in the Middle East, if you don't pay the bribe from the first time, the price will increase. So, so this is what they try always to influence you with. So thank you so much for your valuable information for this session. We are getting so many questions, but we can't have time for all of them. Definitely, we will have you again with us with another session. I would like to thank all our global attendees who attended our session, and hopefully we will see you with us next time. Thank you very much, Mr. Mike.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.